Remember, we are one infinite mind, ever expanding through the physical and spiritual realm, limitless. I could say it in another word that will be more in conformity to those who believe in God, where I would say that we are God expressing himself in individuality form.
Welcome to Spiritual Awakenings International Presents. I'm Dr. Yvonne Cason, the president of Spiritual Awakenings International. We are delighted to have you here. Spiritual Awakenings International is truly an international network. We have subscribers from 71 countries around the world. We always love to know where you're joining us from today. So please take a minute and type into the chat where you're joining us from. We know I'm joining you from Toronto, Canada. Our speaker is joining you from Florida. We've got people here from Mexico, from California, from Oregon, from Arizona. Someone else just wrote in from Seattle. Well, welcome everyone from all around the world. It is my great pleasure today to introduce our featured speaker today, who is Francisco Valentin. Now, Francisco has had multiple spiritually transformative experiences, including a death experience, near-death experience, out-of-body experiences, and many more. He was born in Puerto Rico, but currently lives in Florida in the United States. His spiritual journey, as I'm sure he'll tell us, started in 1979 when he died in a car crash and later came back to life. And he had a mission that was not revealed to him until 32 years later in 2011. And then he started receiving transcripts from a group of ascended masters known as the Collective Forces of Knowledge and Wisdom. He shares over 500 of these transcripts on his website to help everyone with their spiritual growth and development. Welcome, Francisco Valentin.
Thank you, Dr. Cason. As you already know, my name is Francisco Valentin, and I am the author, publisher, and custodian of the transcripts. The transcripts are insights of higher truth that I receive, perceive, and transcribe from what people might call ascended masters, higher beings, higher sources, non-human intelligence form, whatever you want to call them, but they rather be called the collective forces of knowledge and wisdom. And I'll share with you why. What I'm going to be sharing with you, how I became, or at least answer your question, how did you become the transcriber for those collective forces of knowledge and wisdom? So here's my story. Everything started one summer day, 1979, when at the young age of barely turning 18, and due to a fatal car crash, let me share these images with you. I died. I died because I was the driver of this car and I was sitting right there. To give you a better angle or a different angle of the car wreck, let's move it here to this angle, and you can see here where I was sitting. Now, and here is with me when I presented this image in my previous lecture for the first time. Robert Breyer, who happened to be the vice president and co-founder of Spiritual Awakening International, couldn't hold his thought. And I quote, he said, "In my 22 years as a California Highway Patrol sergeant, I've never seen anyone surviving this crash." Then he added, "How did you?" And I replied, "I did not." And later, he accurately told me that that accident must have happened at approximately 60 miles an hour. And he was totally right without not knowing anything about the event. So let me share with you how did I get to have that car accident and how I died. It all started in this little island of Puerto Rico. Right here at the bottom, you see the Dominican Republic, Cuba, and Florida. Puerto Rico is part of the United States by Commonwealth Treaty. So we were young, we just graduated, and we were going to have our last trip in the island before parting our ways to go to college. Now you know where my accent comes from. So if I make any mistakes, you know that English is not my primary language, so be gentle with me, okay? So we decided to go to El Yunque National Forest to spend the day climbing this mountain right here. El Yunque National Forest is one of the highest mountains in Puerto Rico. It's about 3,500 feet above ground level. To many of you, this might be nothing, but for us in that little island, that was a lot. So what we did was we drove all the way to about this point, and then we walked the trail. And I'm going to share with you an image that I've never shown before because I found it in a pile of photos that I had stored, just to show you evidence that we did climb to the top of the mountain. We actually did. It was a very windy day. It was me and my friends. For obvious reason, I blurred the faces of my friends, but this is me, just to show you how skinny I was. I'm still 5'9", but at that time I weighed about 115 and 118. So that means that I did not have any cushion. I received the direct impact with with nothing else to hold me other than my slim body. So after that trip, after climbing the mountain, we were heading back home. So just pretend that this little white car is my car and this is the car of my friends. We were heading in this direction. This is the medium and traffic from the other side. It was approximately 4 o'clock, and I have to admit it. We were young and foolish. I was speeding. They were not. I was speeding. So I was behind them from far away. So I speed up. I wanted to approach them. And as I approached them, I wanted to pass them very quick. So move forward, move in front of them and keep going. I mean, we were just playing. But what I forgot was that very week, I had a flat tire on the rear side, which made me vulnerable to lose traction. And I did. And as I lost traction, I went in front of them. I jumped the medium. I will never forget the sound, the surrounding sound of the impact of the car frame hitting the curb and catapulting in midair. That I will never forget. And because we were speeding, that happened very fast. So when I was heading into that direction, ready to get a front end head-on collision, my friend, the passenger that was with me, he pulled my steering wheel to his right, and I sidewiped this car right here, with the unfortunate event that the front tire got lodged in the rear axle and made me spin. And after I finished spinning, this car hit me at over 60 miles an hour, or approximately 60 miles an hour. How did that happen, and how do I know that this happened at that speed? Because the legal repercussions stopped the moment the driver of this car admitted that she froze and she never let go of the accelerator. In other words, my car stopped that other car. So that's why you see here from end to end how I was sidewiped, how here in the rear axle got lodged and made me spin. And then from here to hear that other car hit me straight at 60 miles an hour. The reason why you cannot see the end of the door is because the door ended up by the center console. And that's, my friend, that's when I went into the void. When I said that I went into the void, it's not the void that you see up in the skies. It's the void within ourselves. And while at the void, I was afraid. I was confused. Yet I was still myself. I remember I did not turn into anything. I did not become an angel, a soul, a spirit, whatever you want to call it. I was myself. Yet I did not recognize ever being Francisco Valentin. I knew I was myself, but I never, in that moment, knew who I was. I asked myself 3 questions. Who am I? Who's my father? And who's my mother? And I don't remember receiving an answer. But I was looking at my identity, when suddenly I saw a dim light approaching me. Now, let me make a pause here. When I say that I saw, it's not that what people might think or believe, that how could you see if you didn't have your eyesight? It's not that I saw. It's the perceptive mind, the one that interprets what has no words into a way that we can relate to whatever it was. Just to give you an example, we cannot see light. We see the reflection of the light. But when you have your eyes closed, you don't have sight. That's very similar to when you're dreaming. When you're dreaming, you run, you cry, you scream, you do everything that you do, but you're not doing it. Well, actually, you're doing it, but not with your physical body. It is the perception that we receive and we transmute into words so we can relate to it. Now, as that dim light approached me, I realized that there were some kind of beings that start getting close to me, and then they start swirling around me in a counterclockwise direction. And as they swirl around me, there were many. As they swirl around me, I felt this peace and this love. But I rather call it peace, because the love that I felt is a love that cannot be put into words, that cannot be interpreted in words, because the love that we know is conditional. And I have not seen anyone who have had a near-death experience that had not agreed with me, because the love that is felt cannot be put into words. And trying to describe it as love, to me, it will be a disservice. So I'd rather call it peace. As I felt that peace that those beings were giving me, my curiosity made me kind of try to identify one of the many different souls or spirits or whatever you want to call it that were surrounding me. And at that point, I did what most people do. Yet I was there, but I was not there. It's just a form of expressing what I felt and what I did. I just tried to look that image of those beings as a moving object will do when you try to look something. And let me share with you the image of what I most likely tell you that it will represent one of those beings. This image I took from the internet, then I shifted, I moved it, I straightened it up, I did all the things that I had to do to try to emulate that image that I saw. As you can see here, there's a face, kind of a face, and it went to the point that when I was looking at that specific entity while I was trying to find the direction in which I can have a clear view, I remember making contact with that being turned and look at me as I was looking at it, and we kind of acknowledge our presence. When suddenly I felt this presence behind everything that I was there. And this presence was like a dark cloud that you could overcast everything, and it overpowered everything that was around me. It was a magnificent force, but I would dare not to describe it because I couldn't. For some reasons, I couldn't describe it. I couldn't put a name, and I didn't want to call it God. When suddenly that presence that overpowered everything, I felt its presence, yet the next thing I know was that I was feeling like if I was going into a funnel, getting narrower and narrower and narrower until my physical body began to ache. And the pain was so strenuous that I just couldn't take it anymore. I took my first breath, I opened my eyes, and I was being taken out of the car. I remember very clearly because I remember the edge of the windshield on the passenger side when I was getting out, when they were removing me out of the car and then laid me on the grass on the median. The accident took place at approximately 4 o'clock. And I was, when I was laid down, it was about 6 p.m. How do I know? Because it was the Caribbean, it was summer day, and at that time on that area, the sun started coming down between 6 and 6:30. So, but the story of how I got pulled out of the car and how I got to the hospital and all that stuff, that's very, very, very complex. So I will not include it here, but I'm going to show you how you can get to that if you want to keep learning a little bit more about it. So after 3 days in the ICU and 3 months of recovery, I wanted to tell everyone what happened to me. That's when let me share this image with you. That's when I wanted to talk about my experience, and I was immediately shut down by my family, my friends, society, culture, religion, science, and even history. It wasn't easy. I was too young. I didn't know how to express myself, and being shut down by this much, it wasn't easy. My family, the only person that really listened to me was my mother, but she didn't have much to say. But I do remember she telling me that when I was at the hospital, I kept saying constantly how beautiful it was on the other side and that I did not want to come back. And I kept repeating that over and over and over again. As to my friends, the experience was so overwhelming that till today, no one wants to talk about it. The only person that came forward was the friend that was with me. And I asked him many years later, was I dead? And he told me, yes, you were dead on my lap. And I said, how do you know? Because you were dead, period. And then I asked, why didn't you tell me? And he said, how could I? When I asked for you, and I mean, what happened to the body that you buried in or whatever, they told me you were alive. So how could I? Society, culture, and religion, they're all tied together. I was raised as a Catholic, so you don't talk about those subjects. At a given point, I was told to please go to the priest. He might have an answer for me, and I did. And I did, as a Catholic, I went to the confessionary. I did what you have to do in the confessionary. I said what I had to say. And the priest actually brushed me off. He kind of didn't believe in me. In fact, he made me do, I don't know how many Hail Marys and how many the Lord's Prayer. And I said, but what did I do wrong? What did I do wrong? And that's when I stopped questioning religion. Science, because science tells you that you live and then you die and that's it. Not so. That is not true. And history, as to history, the history that we know is the most recent history of our creation, but not the true story. That's when I decided, you know what? I'm going to keep it to myself and take it to the grave. And that's when I started reading every book that I could find back in the days, trying to understand what happened to me. So now remember, we're talking about 1979 in the Caribbean, in a little island of Puerto Rico. The only thing that we had available at the time was the local library and a few bookstores. And the information was very, very, very limited. But it worked like this. I opened a book and I started reading. No, that's not it. And I took another one. Well, maybe, but not quite. Another one. Well, not so. Yes, no, yes, no. Why? Because I needed to find that spark that will help me remember what I didn't forget, but I couldn't put into words. And that's when I kept on with my life. So here's lesson number 1. Don't believe everything that you read. And I kept on with my life. I married my beautiful wife. I raised 3 beautiful children. And like I said, I decided to keep it to myself and take it to the grave. This is my son, and we're going to talk about him later on. So my near-death experience, or my death experience, as some people want to call it, is not what brings me to public speaking, because I am one among many, and I am not an exception to the rule. The only reason why I'm here today, and let me share this screen again with you, is because on July 7, 2011, a spirit of light manifested through my son's voice. In other words, my 20-year-old son at the time went into a spiritual trance out of nowhere, out of the blue sky. We never had those type of conversation. I was not a believer of any of this. So I have no way to know how he got to become the vehicle by which the spirit of light manifested through him. So the spirit of light manifested through my son's voice to remind me of an agreement that took place in 1979 in return for my life. But first, it answered all those questions that I couldn't get a straight answer from humanity. And before it left, it granted me what I learned to call higher truth, so I can finish my quest and begin my work. And when higher truth manifested in me, it was like a live review. So those who have had live reviews can know what I'm talking about. There were like sparks of memory where I was seeing an event that already took place, but from a different perspective, not as the doer, which the doer is limited to the information that I receive and the information that I can relate with. I was seeing things as the observer from a different perspective. a totally different perspective where I could see the same event. Nothing had changed, but from another angle, from another perceptive way. So I could see the whole picture of how everything turned out. So sharing the screen here again. So that spark of memory reminded me to confirm that, yes, in 1979, yes, indeed, I died. And I died to validate the existence of life after death. Then another spark of life in the year 2000, when my mother died from a brain tumor. She was diagnosed with a brain tumor. She had to go through chemo, radio, and at the end, there's nothing they could do about it. The tumor kept growing, and it was going to constrain one of the main arteries, and it did. So the doctor confirmed that her brain was not receiving any oxygen when she went into a convulsive state, and she was supposed to die within a couple of hours, but she did not. She kept convulsing all night long, and at 6 a.m., she stopped convulsing. She opened her eyes. She wanted to go to the bathroom, and when she came back, she wanted some legal arrangement to take place. 30 days after all the legal event took place, she died, but not from the brain tumor, from asphyxiation. For me to validate that there is divine intervention and how divine intervention works. But I didn't see it at the time because I believed the medical field, and I did not believe in any of that. Higher truth also manifested in me like a life review when in the year 2002, I had a near-death experience myself. Now here, I make the distinction between 2002 and 1979, because in 2002 I had a near-death experience, but in 1979 I had a death experience because they were totally different. In 2002, I saw the light and I went towards the light, but I came back in a very comical way. But the live review let me know that I was learning this lesson to learn how perception worked. And then another spark of memory reminded me that in 2010, a prophecy was given to me. And it was that when I was in a meditative state, I went like into a funnel. And when I touched bottom, an inner voice told me, from now on, you're not going to learn from outside sources. And moving forward, you're going to learn from within. That I kind of understood, but I didn't know what it was all about. But I just kept my cool. I stopped reading anything and waited. And what was prophesied on 2010 came to pass on July 7, 2011, when I was given higher truth. And by the way, happy birthday transcript. Today is July 16, and on July 7 was the 11th birthday of the transcript. So I have been doing this for 11 years now. Not 11 years doing the same, but 11 years evolving, progressing, understanding, and putting all the pieces together so I can do my job. So let me share with you now what happened on July 7, 2011. On July 7, 2011 was a weekend where my wife, coincidentally, was traveling out of state from work. My youngest daughter was traveling on one of those people in Europe, like a student exchange kind of thing. And I was home alone with my 20-year-old son at the time, who was studying at Berklee College of Music. And he was on vacation staying with me. So we had conversation one-on-one, and approximately 10 p.m., we were ready to call it the night. So I hug him, like every evening, good night, son, we'll see you tomorrow. And then he said, wait, Dad, I want to show you something. I have this music. These are like binary beats kind of music that I want you to listen to it. And I said, well, I really didn't want it to because I was tired, but something compelled me to say, okay, I'll do it. So let me go to the restroom first. So I went to the restroom. And when I came back, I was barefooted. Barefooted meaning that he couldn't hear my steps. And as I approached the door frame, I realized that he already had the music pretty loud. And as I approached the door frame, I saw him at the back because he was against a wall. And I was able to see this angle of his face, and I could see that he had his eyes closed and moving his head rhythmically. And I thought, well, just, listen to the music with his eyes closed and, moving to the beats. And, that didn't say a word. And I was still, we're talking about seconds, but I saw everything and I was still at the doorframe. When my son says, hey, Dad, come, how beautiful. Listen, how lovely. I can sense bright orbs, gorgeous, surrounded by light from all over. And then I said, what are you saying? Because I had no idea what he was talking about. And he said, they are like small spheres circling everywhere, but we're one. And I said, what do you mean we're one? And that's when his voice turned unemotional. And he said, I mean, we are one. And I still thought that he was making a prank on me. So I started asking questions to see if I could get him out of balance. But I didn't. I couldn't get him out of balance. I asked the same questions and I got this answer. I asked the same question in a different way and I still got the same answer. And then I tried another way and I still got the same answer. And that's when I realized that there was something fishy here. That's not my son. So I kept asking questions and the answer were getting more profound every time that I kept asking questions. And I'm not going to give you the detail because I want you to read it yourself at your pace and your time. But there was a point in that conversation asking questions. Those questions I couldn't get a straight answer from humanity. I was getting those answers. But then got to the point that I was asking a question in my mind, and before I finished formulating the question, I already had the answer. And that bugged the heck out of me. And out of frustration, I said, well, why am I here? And that's when he stood up. He turned around, he's opened his eyes, and he said very energetically, don't you see you and I agreed to come down for you to help me do my entrustment? He closed his eyes, turned around, sat down, and began to move his head rhythmically. And I surrendered. That's when I realized that there's something very, very wrong here. I am before a presence that is beyond me. Now, let me make a pause here. Don't you see? You and I agree to come down for you to help me do my job. Means that in 1979, still I cannot explain how I survived. Neither I can explain how I'm here walking, running, and doing everything I'm doing because I'm supposed to be either in a wheelchair or paralyzed because I should have been cut in half. But I didn't. So something happened that I'm still trying to figure it out. How come before the accident, I must have had a spiritual barrier keeping me from dying, to then make an arrangement or an agreement and be reminded now of all the experiences that I had through higher truth, where I was learning from 1979 and getting to read everything that I could, trying to put everything together, and the experiences that I had through my lifetime to get me to this moment that I was prepared enough for that spiritual light to manifest through my son's voice. Now, why did that entity choose my son? Because I am one of the most analytical, stubborn son of a gun you will ever see. And I wouldn't have believed anyone. My son had no knowledge of my story, neither had the knowledge that he was prophesying. If I would have been directly through me, I would say that this is my mind, forget it. If it would have been through somebody else, I would say, oh, this guy is cuckoo or trying to fool me or whatever. But my son, that was a totally different story because I know the nature of my son. So let me share with you now, how is it that I came to call them the collective forces of knowledge and wisdom? But before I do that, let me keep with the story. The following day, I woke up with this urge to write, not knowing what. I'm not a writer. I never write, and I less like to read. I read because I have no choice. So I opened my computer and I said, so here it is. What am I going to do now? So I start typing to realize that I was transcribing word for word the event that took the night before. Call it automatic writing because I have no knowledge of how to do this and no memory to be able to recollect up to the last detail of that event. The following day, and subsequently moving forward, I began to wake up between 1 and 3 a.m., downloading information so perfectly understandable, yet so complex and so hard to understand. But as I was getting this information, I knew its simplicity. I knew exactly what each word meant. And I began transcribing that information. Between 1 and 3 o'clock in the morning, every night. It got to the point that I couldn't keep writing and I started recording. And that's what I've been doing ever since, recording the information that I'm getting and pass it on to you. Now, the way I receive the information is kind of different from what I've heard a channel or a medium would do. So let me share with you one image because here it is. I ask, who are you? I mean, you want to know. I mean, if you're channeling, you want to know who you're channeling. So I ask, who are you? Why am I doing this? How am I going to call whatever is doing this? How am I going to describe it? And that's when this download came about. It said, name calling limits the source through reasoning, rather say that it comes from the collective forces of knowledge and wisdom. Now, as you can see here, the language or the way it is crafted, it is not easy to understand, but I knew exactly what it meant. It's kind of a language or a way of writing that I needed to put together, and the transcripts are not easy to read. But let me give you this example. Name calling limits the source through reasoning means that if I give them a name, or if they give me a name, more likely, they were going to be limited because they are the source. They're going to be limited through the reasoning that I will have of who this entity might be. Let me give you a good example. Let's say that they would have said, for example, okay, we are an archangel, whatever. By archangel, they will be limited to the information that they will be given me because of my reasoning. In other words, if it's an archangel will not be talking about reincarnation. So it has to be in accordance to a wider spectrum, which they say, rather say that it comes from a collective forces of knowledge and wisdom. So why a collective forces? Because it's more than one. I have been able to recognize about 4 of them, but they come and go because it's a collective group giving me information. And as time goes by, the information gets deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. Now, another question that you might have was, how did you come up with the word transcript? Well, when I asked again, so what is it that I'm doing? I mean, I'm getting all this information, I'm writing everything down, either that or recording it, and this is not for me. This is for me to pass on to someone else. So how am I going to describe this? So that's when I saw in my mind an old parchment, and I knew that it was old as old can be, but I couldn't put words to it. So in a blast, the word transcript came about. So the way that I get the information is I receive their intent, and through their intent, I put it into words. But it doesn't work always like that. Sometimes I get images and I know exactly what those images are. And I'm going to give you an example. When I started to come out and do public speaking, because I realized that this is not for me, this is for me to share. I asked, how am I going to call this experience that people call that is near-death experience? How am I going to explain it in a different way so people can understand? Because I didn't understand it myself. So here I have to give credit to my wife, because I was asking this question and she looked at me and she said, well, ask them. And I said, oh, that's true. Oh, okay. So I grabbed a piece of paper and I started scribbling. And this is what I came out with. That is what a near-death experience is. But I knew exactly what each line meant to the perfection. So let me share that with you. Okay, let's pretend that we are in school today. Okay, and let's pretend that life is linear, although life is not linear. But for the purpose of trying to explain this to you, let's pretend that life is linear. So let's start again. So let's divide life in 2. This belongs to the physical plane of reality, and the other half to the spiritual plane of reality. The physical has everything to do with creation. I don't know if you can see on the far edge of the screen. The physical has everything to do with creation, and the spiritual has to do with the origin of life. And yes, there is an origin and an uncertain future. It's just that the limitations of the mind cannot get us that far. But that's another subject for another lecture. Okay, so let's divide these 2 worlds with this red line. When the soul gets compromised because of an accident, an injury, or it can no longer be in a lifeless body, the soul goes from the physical to its true nature, which is the spiritual realm. And when it comes back with a memory of what took place on the other side, that's what people call a near-death experience. But I learned through the transcript and this image and that scribbling of lines that any near-death experience is none other than a spiritual experience. Now, this goes very in accordance with Spiritual Awakening International, because Spiritual Awakening International put everything together into spiritually transformative experience. And by the way, this was done back in 2011. So, they are transformative because once you have one of those experiences, you transform your life. You are never going to be the same once you understand that there's more on the other side. But these fall in the category of a spiritual experience, near death, out of body experience, and every single name that people want to put to an experience on the other side and back. Now, remember that I said when you come with a memory of what took place, you claim to have a near-death experience, but coming back and not remembering, does that mean that you didn't have a near-death experience? Not necessarily, because when I was on the other side, I do remember being the void. I do remember those periods of light. I remember being in peace. I remember the presence of that superior being, but I don't remember the agreement. And I did not remember the agreement until after 32 years later. So if you had a similar experience and you claim that you didn't have a near-death experience, you might in the future have knowledge that you did have a spiritual experience. So if it happens to you many years later, don't think you're crazy, because you're not. I would have thought the same, and I did not, thanks to a spirit of light who reminded me. Otherwise, none of this would have made sense to me or anybody else. Okay, so keeping up with the lecture, this is the way I am going to share with you. Hold on. Okay, these are messages from the transcript, excerpts that I've been able to take out, because those are the ones that represent most of what they are all about. Truth is one, interpretations many. It is funny how every religion have their own truth, but what they have is the interpretation of that one truth. I'm not here to claim that I know the absolute truth, because we're limited in our human mind to understand a higher truth, but I do know a higher truth. Another expression is life is one, experiences many. This one is funny how many people said life is one and they interpret it in so many ways. Some say that life is one, so you better enjoy every minute of it, because once it's gone, it's gone. And then others say life is one, not knowing how deep that statement is. But through the transcript, life is one because you live only once. And you are alive and you have life since the first movement took form. And your experiences are the many of that one life, through lifetime after lifetime, eon after eon. In fact, today you are the sum total of all your experiences since the first movement took form. And that makes you who you are today, with your past experiences, the good, the bad, and the ugly. That makes you who you are today. Life is one, experiences many. Another transcript reads as follows. Hold on. Technical issues. There is no mystery in life, only lack of information at what lies ahead. So the transcripts are going to take you step by step to higher truth, one transcript at a time. Now, let me share with you one message those from the collective forces of knowledge and wisdom want me to share with you, and I will comply. And it reads as follows. If we ever understand that we are one infinite mind, endlessly expanding through the physical and spiritual realm, limitless, then we will comprehend that the physical world is only an illusion. Now, let me say this again and explain a bit better. If we ever understand that we are one infinite mind, it doesn't mean that you are one infinite mind and you are an infinite mind and you are an infinite mind and I am an infinite mind. No. It means that we are one infinite mind. We all are only one infinite mind, ever expanding through the physical and spiritual realm, limitless, because we have free will. And if we ever comprehend that, then we will understand that the physical world, which is just a speck in our lifetime since the beginning of time, the physical world is only an illusion. So here we are. And this is my book, Near-Death Experiences, A Glimpse at What Lies Ahead. If you're interested in knowing the whole story, from my 1979 death experience to the car accident, how everything unfolded, the year 2000 with the death of my mother, the 2002 how perception works, 2011, and the transcript. You can read it all. The book is small. It's an easy read. The only thing that I will ask you is to understand that I'm not a writer, but I speak from the heart. So when you read the book, just imagine that I'm talking to you with my flaws and everything. The message, you're gonna get it. You're gonna get the message. And I want to share with you also one message that I received from one reader from that book. And the message was so profound that it made my day, it made my life, and that's why I keep doing this. So let me share this with you. This person wrote to me. For just reason, I deleted the name and the face and everything. And it reads as follows. A friend told me about your book. That is the first time I have encountered anything which explained what happened to me when I died for a brief time before the doctors brought me back. Thank you for ending my lifetime search for validation. It meant so much to me after all these years. I am now 81. Nice to know I am not crazy after all these years. That by itself says it all. Someone who had a lifetime thinking that she was crazy and being able through this little book to give her validation to her experience is priceless. So I'm going to invite you now, every single one of you, to go to my webpage, thetranscript.org. Here is the HTTPS, and log in, subscribe, and upon subscribing, you're gonna get access to the first transcript. When you read the first transcript, I want to let you know that the way I was being addressed through that first transcript was at a level that I could comprehend at that time. I had no knowledge of all this. I mean, I've been doing this for 11 years, evolving step by step from a non-believer Catholic to understanding this much higher truth. It's something that I had progressively learn to understand and put all the pieces together. Lead by example, which has been the hardest thing to do. Because now I have to be confronted with the things that I did in the past that I no longer do, and criticized by, oh, now you're not doing this, so what is it? So it's not easy. It is not easy, but it's something that I have to do. Anyways, so it was written in very simple words, yet very profound. The same simplicity can reach a very profound meaning depending on the level that you are. And as you keep reading those transcripts and you become familiar with information that I receive and I share with you, that's when you, little by little, will start growing and become awakened. The message is very simple. All they're doing is helping us remember what we never forgot, but we are not pursuing because of lack of support. It is just bringing back to memory what we already have known. And just to give you an example, and you might be having that question, and I'm going to go ahead and answer it, which is that when I finished with that experience with my son, I asked him, do you remember what happened? And he said, yes, I remember every single bit of it. And how do you? And then he said, I remember as if I have always known. Mm-hmm. Then I said, do you remember then when you stood up and you told me, no, I don't remember. So imagine how much force and energy that entity move has taken to take my son away from the picture, standing up, open his eyes, giving me that message, sitting down, and then letting my son come back, because he does not remember a bit of that. So that is another way to validate the experience that I had. So now I'm going to share this last image with you before we go to the Q&A, that hopefully you're going to have a lot of questions for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Francisco. That was absolutely fascinating. It is my great pleasure now to introduce Ann Archer, who is going to be moderating the question and answer period for you, Francisco. So I'll disappear and I'm going to let Ann take over.
Thank you.
Hi, Francisco, that was great. We have a lot of questions for you, but I'd like to start the questions by asking you one. What does higher truth mean to you? You mentioned that several times. Could you speak to us about that?
Yes. Actually, that's another question that I ask. What is this information that I'm getting? And I get the answer, higher truth. So what is higher truth? So like a life review, they took me back to when I was at first grade. I don't know how many of you remember when you learn from 1 to 10, to count from 1 to 10. And I received the information that higher truth is like math. So when I went in retrospection to first grade, they gave me that passage in my life when I remember very vividly when the teacher told the class, today you're going to learn from 1 to 10. And I thought that I was going to learn the basic of all the numbers because that's what I was told. So I learned I learned from 1 to 10, and I recited at school, and I was very proud of learning all the numbers. When the teacher suddenly said, now class, we're going to learn to read, learn to count from 10 to 20. And I said, wait a minute, didn't you just told me that was higher truth? And then I had to learn to add and subtract before I could learn to multiply and divide, before I could learn algebra. So higher truth is learning one step at a time, one higher truth at a time. Another example is like, for example, if I would have had, let's just give a crazy example. If I would have had an accident and I lost my memory and I forgot how to speak, I would have to learn how to speak from the very beginning, little by little, until I become proficient in learning how to speak. So when I say higher truth, it's not the absolute truth. It's a little bit of higher truth at a time, because not everyone have the same knowledge, not everyone have the same ability to learn or capacity to learn. So the transcript, some are complex, some are not that complex, some are very rudimentary, others that are very, very excessively, wow, out of the charts. But as you keep reading and learning higher truth, you're gonna get there little by little. So higher truth is like math. Don't try to cram everything at once, because you're not gonna get it. It's just little by little. Trying to say, okay, I want to learn algebra without having to go first through the early stages before you learn algebra, you're never gonna get algebra. Okay, so I hope I answered that question for you. Thank you.
Of course, that was perfect. Thank you. Okay, now early on, we had a question here. If you could go back to, I think it might have been your next to last slide, the one that says that physical life is only an illusion. Could you bring that slide up again and perhaps address that? They'd like to see that slide.
Okay, hold on. Let me see.
That was Carol Ann asking for that. Thank you, Carol Ann. Not that one. Yeah.
This one, right?
I think so. You want to read that to us again and review it quickly?
If we ever understand that we are one infinite mind, endlessly expanding through the physical and spiritual realm, limitless, then we will comprehend that the physical world is only an illusion. So what was the question now?
They just wanted to review it.
Oh, okay.
Just to bring it back up and review it quickly. That was good. Thank you. And of course, you know, what we're talking about here is that life is an illusion, that the physical world is an illusion, and that the inner world exists simultaneously. So thank you. And how often, excuse me, how often do you get information?
Well, at first it was every single night until I get burned, because waking up between 1 and 3 in the morning, trying to get into this little brain of mine, all that information, although it was very simple, at the end, then I couldn't go back to sleep. I mean, getting all this information new to me, I was overwhelmed. And I got to the point in which I said, okay, no, hold on, you got to give me a break. Too much, too soon, too fast. So I asked them to at least let me sleep. And when I wake up, whatever information you want to bring forward, let me know upon waking up, or where I'm doing anything else, but I need my sleep. So yes, I began to get the information by waking up. As soon as I woke up, I just grabbed my iPad and I start writing, or either that or recording. Presently, I do get them from time to time, because I got already so many that I was told by the collective that I'm not going to get any more until I start publishing and put into practice much of what they've told me. So we still got a long way to go. But the way they manifest now is that, for example, I could be listening to some music or watching TV, and next thing my wife knows I'm gone and I am in my office transcribing. I can be doing something, and I can get the message, hello, look at this, and because of this, this and this and this and this and this happened. And next thing I know, I'm already transcribing any given transcript. So yes, it is from time to time. There's no set rule. It's just whenever it's needed, it's needed.
You know, there was a question about whether this is during meditation, but that's not exactly what you're describing, because sometimes it's coming straight out of the dream state and you sit up and you just start writing, right?
Yes, in fact, I do not meditate. I should, but I do. I don't meditate. So what happens to me is that I could be woke up in the middle of the night, or I can be, like I said, doing something, and suddenly this information comes in, and as soon as I realize that it's not coming from me because of the profoundness of the words or the message or the intent, which is basically what I do. I receive their intent. Once I get that intent, I just write it down anywhere. I mean, I just could, I grab the phone. There have been so many times that I have been transcribing while driving. I don't know how I do it, but I do it. I think I shouldn't, but I do it. And I keep my full mind in the road, yet I'm talking because I'm getting the information and pass it on. But the thing is that I am not a recorder. In other words, it's not that I get information, I put it in a paper, put it in the recorder, and here it is. I don't know anything about it. To the opposite, I know it first, and then I put it in writing. That way, if you have any question, I can explain it as many ways as possible, because I got it here, not in the words, you see?
Interesting. Okay, I find that interesting. Anna Cecilia loves your presentation and said you were awesome, but she's also asking this question. So this information comes from spiritual beings, this collective, as you mentioned. Do you know who they are? You mentioned that you might know several of them. Can you talk to us about that?
Oh, yes, yes. I learned that I call them ascended master because I was told at one point that I should call them ascended master so people can relate to them. Because when I say collective forces of knowledge and wisdom, people say, what is that? You know, where is that coming from? You know, but at least they have a point of reference, okay? So what I do, well, you got to ask me the question again. I just went blank.
Well, what Anna Cecilia asked was, do you know who they are?
Yes,
I mean, we recognize saying they are a collective of spiritual beings, but the question really is, do you know who they are?
Yes. So what I do is I learn to identify them by their personality. They do, each one of them has their own personality. Remember, we are one infinite mind, endlessly expanding. So they already have gone through different realms, and each has their own personality. I had my own, and everybody had their own. One of them, I recognize them as the teacher, because some transcript, when I transcribe it, I see the loving way this entity wants to bring the information. Then I have the poet. There's one that loves to play with words. I mean, in a very, very comical way. I am no poet, so I have no knowledge of poetry rules or anything like that. I just see the beauty in the words that they use, or he used, or whatever it is. Then I have the scolder. That one is the one that goes, you guys are doing this, and he really hammered it really bad. So at least those are three. And then I had a few others that I haven't been able to pinpoint. One of them I recognize as one of my old teachers in the one previous life, that I call him Chang, because that's the name that resonates with me. And I have had a few experiences where I was given, how should I say, a memory recollection of events that happened in previous life with his presence. and I know he's there with me. And that's as far as I know, that's what I have been able to gather, because I am not into wanting to know who are you and what is that. It's just that I just learned to recognize them through the years.
Well, we also noticed that when you ask about the name, they said that would limit it. So I think your perspective is excellent. There was a question too about, you were trying to make a distinction between a near-death experience and a death experience. Is that important for some reason? And do you want to chat about that for a moment?
Well, it is important to me. I am not here trying to change the definition of things, because that's not my work. But in my book, in my work, in my experience, what I had in 1979 was a death experience because I died, period. And I went into the void. I mean, I joke about it many times when I said that the impact was so severe that I went over the tunnel, over the pathway, over the bridge, over lost loved ones, over God, or anywhere, and I went straight into the void. But that's me joking about it. However, in 2002, the experience that I had was that I saw light and I went towards the light. My soul wanted to move towards the light in a very gentle way, which makes a distinction between the experience in 1979, which is highly abrupt, and this very subtle way of taking me to the other side and then letting me go so I can return and learn. Because basically, it's not, I'm gonna take you to this experience so you can have the experience. No, it's, I'm taking you to this experience so you can learn some things from this experience. You see, because for example, seeing the light, how can you relate seeing the light to how perception works? How perception works is very different as having just one experience of seeing the light. But like I said, like in a live review, that you see things from a different perspective, a totally different angle. I saw the big picture, and I was able to translate into words, into thought. And actually, I do explain how perception works in different videos. The exception is that it would take a little bit more time than what I had. Anyways, so yeah, I hopefully answer your question here.
Yeah, thank you. That was great. There's a lot of questions here. I'm skipping around, but Susan asked one that I was interested in right off the bat. Does your son have an interest in the metaphysical? Susan is asking, is he interested in what you're doing?
No. I don't want to say unfortunately, but you know, I wish he would have, but no, he wants to stay away from public knowledge. He doesn't want to. He wants to be known as who he is, and not like someone, a medium or anything like that. He's just very reserved. He's very into him. He's very. It's like me. I'm an introvert. I don't know what I'm doing here. But I don't have a choice. He does. So he rather stay away from all this. Maybe, I don't know, when he turned 50, he might turn around. I have no clue. But I have to do my job and let him be who he is right now. He might not be prepared. He might be, I don't know, waiting for the right moment to evolve. I mean, my experience took place at age barely turning 18. I mean, the accident took place about August, and my birthday is in June. So I was practically 17 when all this happened. And it took me a lifetime. I didn't get any of this until I turned 50. So I have no clue what the future brings, but I can tell you one thing. Right now, he doesn't want to get involved in this.
Great. He's exercising his free will, isn't he? That's perfect.
I guess so, and I have to acknowledge that.
Great. I have another question from Lillian that I really liked. Do you ask questions and then get answers? Or do you ever ask questions? Or are the transcripts not evoked in any way?
Oh, yes. I mean, like I said, I'm very inquisitive. So I did not wait a chance to learn how to step in and get out without disturbing their presence. So I learned to, whenever, I mean, when I get the information that I'm talking about long sentences, and trying to get in between at first wasn't easy. It's just that I learned that that once I see a little pause and I know that the information already kind of is settled in my mind, I jump in, ask a question, and then I pull out, I get an answer. And yes, so when you subscribe, you're gonna be reading a lot of transcript that I put my initials FB with a dash because that's my question, and then their initial, the collective forces of knowledge and wisdom as an answer given. So, and there are plenty of those. So I invite you to explore the many transcripts that I have.
Thank you. I'm sure many people will want to do that. Monique asked a question. This is a long one. Let's see if we can unpack this. How is it possible that after a near-death experience or spiritually transformative experience, that we can never forget that experience as it changes our lives forever? But at the same time, after these profound experiences, we find we continue to go through times of remembering things that we feel we already know. It's like we have awakened to the opportunity to learn truths. So there's a question in there somewhere, and it began with, how is it possible that we can never forget the experiences?
Well, it is my opinion that you don't forget the experience because you are given a chance to remember. So once you remember, you remember. It is just us who had been blocked or shut down or whatever you want to call when we move to this plane, when we reincarnate, we are not supposed to remember. So let me give you one example. Imagine that the Spirit of Light would have told me that we make this agreement, and this agreement is this and this and this and this and this and this and that. I would have done it a long time ago just to get rid of it, just to do my bidding. But did I do it from the heart? No. So that's why so many things are kept from resurfacing. For example, a 5-year-old will not remember being married or having children because he will go crazy. So there are many things that are not being told. In my case, I do not know what's the next step. I'm living day by day, getting the transcript. I don't know what is it that they have in store for me. I don't know how far am I going to get with this. I don't know if I'm going to become the next prophet or if I'm going to just die and the transcript are going to be kept for the next 100 years, and then someone is going to pop out and say, hey, you know what, I found this. So who was Francisco Valentin? Oh, someone who died 100 years ago. So I have no clue. I'm doing what I need to do. And I do remember because, for example, not only it impacted my life in so many ways, but it also gave me a chance to open myself into trying to understand things that I didn't understand before. So when people have near-death experience or death experience or any other experience that, let's say, spiritually transformative experiences, once they have those, they are already aware. And as you are aware, you're going to be looking for more and more and more. And you're going to be more open to receiving, because now you know that you can receive. You see? I hope I answered that question.
Sure, I thought that was perfect. You know, there was something you addressed when you said you only live once, and yet you clearly believe in reincarnation. And then you mentioned we only live once, lifetime after lifetime. So you are talking about perhaps the beingness that we are as spirit or as soul goes from incarnation to incarnation, but it's all life. You want to address that for a moment?
Yes. Remember, we are one infinite mind, ever expanding through the physical and spiritual realm, limitless. I could say it in another word that will be more in conformity to those who believe in God, where I would say that we are God expressing himself in individuality form. In other words, we're still that one who had been experiencing life since the first movement took form. So that life is one. We are one. We are one source. We're only one experiencing those many lives. You are the sum total of all your experiences since the first movement took form. I read, I mean, I'm Catholic. I was born and raised Catholic from a Catholic school. And I will never forget when I learned that, metaphorically speaking, God wanted to see himself. And in that duality that God wanted to see himself, it multiplied itself into the many aspects of who we are today. From the spiritual to the physical, we needed to evolve to become the first particle to then become who we are today. If we are one, we're including everything in our relationship with this ecosystem that we have. If you notice, if you know, our body is 100% microbes. I mean, we are all microbes put together and harmonizing in ways that we can express ourselves through the physical senses. We're spiritual beings experiencing life through the physical senses, the touch, and that one you are going to read it in the first transcript as it says. And actually that question is being answered already in the first transcript. So I urge you to subscribe and get that first transcript, and it will answer that question straight from the source.
Thank you. That was excellent. We have another question. When this first experience happened with your son, you stated words like this: don't you see, you and I agree or have agreed to come down for me to do my job. Can you kind of explain who the pronouns are here? Who came down, who agreed, my job, whose job? Just give us a little bit more definitions there.
Okay. For starter, I was having a conversation with a spirit of light, not with my son. Mm-hmm. My son was only the vehicle. So I can only assume that that entity was one from the collective forces of knowledge and wisdom. Mm-hmm. But it could also be a messenger to opening the ground for the collective forces of knowledge and wisdom to go in. But I couldn't get to the collective forces of knowledge and wisdom unless I opened myself, which I did, which was when I got that information, I surrendered. And as I surrendered, I accepted what I was being told. And as I accepted, I was granted access to that higher truth. And that's how I began to have those live reviews and looking everything through a different perspective as the observer. Who was that? All I know it was the spirit of light. And that spirit of light probably was the one that I made the original agreement with. Mm. And for me to come down to help that entity do its job is because the entity needs someone that will receive the information as my son did. The spirit of light could not talk to me unless it was through a human being to deliver the message. Just like the many mediums that we know, channelers that we know, They get information because they open themselves to it. My son didn't open himself; he just grabbed them, so to speak. But in my case, I realized that I was being given a message, and that was a reminder. Plus, somehow I knew because I went through the experience of being on the other side. So my son had no idea, had no clue whatsoever of the details of that event. So how could he, unless it was through an entity who spoke through him? So the relationship would be the spirit of light who manifested through my son's voice, reminded me of that agreement that took place in 1979, which I did not remember, but it was part of the experience. And now I'm opening myself, and now I'm receiving that information. I hope that I answered that question accordingly. But as to the entrustment, as you can see, I mean, you gotta be careful with this because the transcript was originally in Spanish because that's my native language, and I am transcribing everything in English for people to have access. So I'm trying to use the words that fit more appropriate in English that was originally in Spanish. In Spanish was my encomienda, which is entrustment. In other words, something must have been, something took place, or I don't know, I'm just guessing that probably say, okay, you're coming back with the condition that you become the messenger for this new movement that we are trying to make. Because one thing that I need to address is that the transcripts are inside of higher truth, but with a twist, that the information is coming forward without theological ties this time around. In other words, it's nothing new. It had been told in so many ways from so many sources in so many times ago, with the exception that this time they're trying to put this together in a way that we can get out of the metaphor that we have been living all our lives that have kept us, and this is my personal opinion, in this treadmill to nowhere, reincarnating and reincarnating and reincarnating without moving on, because we keep doing the same things, keep doing the same mistake, not wanting to learn. And there are only a few of us that really, really want to awaken and go back home. That's another metaphor, going back home. Because home is not a place to dwell, but a state of mind. Remember that we are one infinite mind. We are mind, we're not body, we're not flesh. I hope I answered that question.
Very much so. I think we're winding down now. You know, you have said we're one mind. Some people say consciousness and separate mind from consciousness. How do you feel about that, Francisco?
Well, I learned this a long, long time ago, especially with the transcript. I am not into the details of what you call spiritual realm, ethereal realm, soul, spirit. I'm not into that because I don't want to put definitions that already people have been put to certain things. I am trying to deliver a message as clear as possible, and I'm trying to stay away from religion, from science, from history, from philosophy. I'm trying to stay away from all that. If you read those transcripts, you will realize how much of philosophical things are embedded in those transcripts. For example, one thing that I learned a long time ago with the transcript was the term as above, so below. Mm-hmm. I had no clue where that came from. But the transcripts are very clear, as above, so below, because the physical and the spiritual is the same. What happened in the physical world happened in the spiritual world, the good, the bad, and the ugly. But I'm not into giving definitions or things like that. So with all due respect, I'll try as much as possible to stay away from I was having this or I was having that, and giving terms and trying to fit into the conformity of what people understand. I mean, for example, when I detach from the body, to me, I went to the spiritual realm. I don't want to complicate your life with terms that no, I went into this other realm, or I went into this dimension. I've heard so many stories of how many dimensions there are, but one said 4 or 5, 10, 20 million. Who cares? I mean, there are many, many dimensions that we need to go through before we can go back to the source, one step at a time. For example, here on Earth, you know how many dimensions are here on Earth? There are the ones that are very, very grounded, the ones that are very, very dense, and the ones that are very, very, very light. Yet we're still in the same world. See? So here we have plenty of dimensions to work with. So imagine over the other side, how many more? So who wants to start putting definitions to all that? You know? So.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for answering our questions. I love your attitude. I love your perspective, and your experience was remarkable. It remains so. Thank you for your transcripts. We appreciate it, Francisco, for sharing with us today.
Thank you for everyone.
And I'm just going to add to that. Thank you, Francisco, for an absolutely fabulous presentation. I think people are going to absolutely love watching the video and listening to these precious words, and also getting your transcript. So thank you.